Mike Owens here. Today I'm joined by Brian Campbell, one half of the two-timer winning Morning Kombat, as well as plenty of other places. Brian, great to sit down and chat as always. How are things with you today?
Doing great. I'm definitely not, although it looks like I'm being contained here in this underground bunker. It's really just a hotel room. Doing great on the road. I don't know if the buzz of Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia in boxing has hit you yet, but here in the States, handling the 2 day press conference run for them, it's been great. But yeah, man, any chance we get to hang out, it's great. I just had a nice chat on camera with the Scottish man himself, Paul Craig. And the thing about being a Scouser is I can understand you and I respect you. What is up with this Scottish accent? It's literally another language.
So, if you know the geography of the UK, we're probably one of the closer cities to Scotland.
Sure.
Then once you hit the Scottish border, it goes off. I actually watched your interview with Paul Craig yesterday, and I was struggling myself to keep up with his
We
accent.
almost needed to put subtitles on him, which would have been, which is hard to do because he's such a cool dude. I don't want to put him in that box, but yeah, I needed a translator there, but all good. My visit to the UK, by the way, was received with nothing but love. I can't wait to go back. Your people up there, Mike Owens Media, they're some good folks. All right, I didn't get as high as Liverpool, right? But them UK blokes are all right with me.
Well, I've only been to London I've only been to London 5 times, and four of those 5 times were to go to Wembley. That
Not
says a lot
bad.
of that says a lot about my state of my love for London. It seems to be just going up there for football or boxing matches, but we'll leave that there. It's a different conversation for a different day. Ryan, I wanted to get you on today to discuss the eagerly anticipated UFC 286 card. Only the second pay-per-view in the UFC 200s, if you like, taking place on UK soil, previously 204. First and foremost, this Leon versus Usman main event. Are you getting a big fight feel from this one over in the US? Does it feel as big of as a fight as a event as it was going to feel over here?
So no, in the sense of can I feel it? Have I run into it constantly? Is everybody talking about it? Sadly, no. And this just give me an opportunity to jump in and complain that there's too much power slap on my timeline, courtesy of the UFC and my email inbox when that is not something I'm trying to subscribe to. Look, I think it's fair in some regards short of fight week of late, have we said it just hasn't felt like the same big buzz field. John Jones, even the John Jones return snuck up on us once that fight week hit. Oh, it hit the ground running. It's the first time we had heard John Jones speak at length in a long time. So that's a big part of it. But it's almost heartbreaking about this build to this trilogy coming off of like the ultimate Rocky movie moment in MMA is that it's not yet. It hasn't gotten a hold. It's not being debated and talked about. I feel like when I bring it up on Morning Kombat, it's almost like, hey guys, don't forget we got this sneaky great fight with this great narrative coming up. And I mean, that upset, the way it happened, the time that it happened in Usman's arc. I mean, he was talking about like going to light heavyweight if he won that. I mean, like there was like a lot of, let's box Canelo. There's a lot of stuff that was going on when that happened. To do a trilogy and do it in London, man, there are so many elements to this fight. It's a dream fight. Now, you need personalities to sell as well. I love their personalities in this setting. It's the forgotten hero of Leon against that blue collar champion who looked like he was ready to make the leap to immortality. And then, one mistake or one moment, if the sport isn't already crazy enough where there's so many ways to lose in so many instances, Leon Edwards was holding on to that one moment to play that note. This trilogy has everything, but I'm hoping by fight week it'll catch up. Even if it doesn't, the hardcores are going to be digging in with good reason here. This will be good. And, to be fair, you don't really know which direction it's going. Even though Usman, in my opinion, was well on his way to victory in round 5 last time. And even though I believe betting odds wise, it should be Usman, and I don't know ultimately what my pick will be, but if you're, trying to read the temperature, I'm like, well, Usman, in my opinion, if he is the true champion that I think he is, should be able to. But we're talking about a trilogy in which both guys have a win, and it's in London, and Leon Edwards just jumped out of his skin to reassess what his true ceiling actually might be. And Usman's age. Sometimes somebody gets the better of somebody once, and you go, oh, like BJ Penn, Frankie Edgar. You're like, okay, that was whoa, okay, Frankie. but can you do it again? And then they do. And it's the younger fighter that's maybe a little bit more hungry or just riding more momentum. I mean, it's crazy because you never know when that hot streak, a lot of guys do end up peaking late. Usman peaked late age-wise, right? To come into full balance as a legitimate pound-for-pound king. But you never know when it's going to fall apart. And sometimes it's chin, sometimes it's injury, sometimes it's whatever. But when it goes, it goes. This is like that Usman opportunity to come in and like triumphantly reclaim it and reassess now in this new pound for pound conversation. Do you like Alex? Do you like Islam? What about John? Hey guys, what about Usman? Like that's also in play with a big win here. If Rocky Edwards can't continue that story, that beautiful story. Because one thing Chuck Mindenhall told me, Mike Owens Media, when we talked about the Adesanya versus Poatan UFC title fight that just happened, was he said, you know, all this talk about Izzy and his old boogeyman coming back. What if this whole story is really about Pereira? You know what I'm saying? Like about his fight for respect. It's not dissimilar to frame, if you remember, the Manny Pacquiao Juan Manuel Marquez rivalry, which had 3 really close fights, all of which Marquez thought he won because, you know, Marquez never believed that he lost. And then the 4th time he excises the most vicious possible revenge. And he's just like, I won the rivalry. You know, what else do we need to see here? Pereira's got a chance in another great rematch to do that same thing. And so this matchup has that same element. It adds like class to the event, right? It's not just great title rematch. That's also a trilogy. It's the arcs and the stories. Like, is this the Rocky story? Or does Rocky Edwards have the same one night magic that Matt Serra had, that Juliana Pena had? You know, that, and even whether he wins or loses this trilogy, like he's still a great fighter. But he'd be a great fighter with a bullet if he gets 2 wins over this version of Kamaru Usman.
That's a point I wanted to mention, is there's a lot of similarities between the 2 Brits who won the UFC title and how they won it in different rounds and all of that. But you think about the triumphant moment Michael Bisping had 6-7 years ago to the triumphant moment Rocky had last year. I'm wondering if you think that win, lose or draw on the 18th of March, is Leon Edwards' legacy halfway cemented?
I like that framing too, man, because there is something. This is what we love about British fighters from an American standpoint. Now, has there long, especially in boxing, has there long been this stereotype that, oh, somebody's looking good on the other side of the pond? Well, you know, bring it to Vegas against one of our top Americans and find out if you can sink or swim. And, you know, even the great Ricky Hatton, I always bring up just to remind people that we had those same questions about him. And even though he did lose to Mayweather and Pacquiao on that level, I think he still proved himself truly all-time great. But there's always this underdog fervor in how we see this rising UK fighter, like a comet coming on. And, you know, even the great Dan Hardy, who got as high as a title fight against GSP, maybe didn't have that same sort of triumphant win that you'll always go back to and think of. But to me, always had this like overachieving spirit. Like, I'm going to turn this opportunity into something that maybe it shouldn't be, in part because my journey to get here, and, you know, maybe Luke Conor McGregor on the Ireland side into this, my journey to get here featured such adversity mixed with an unnatural level of belief of not just in oneself, but that the impossible amounts of hard work in front of you will actually be worth it. Okay, you also have to be pretty damn great at your craft, and so is Leon Edwards, so is a lot of these folks who finally got their one big drink of the cup. And, you know, even though Bisping, in my opinion, needed that win to get the sort of Hall of Fame respect he retains now, it's not as if we wouldn't be still saying, if he didn't knock out Luke Rockhold at UFC 199, that Bisping's a great fighter. He was great, he always was, but damn, that gave him that extra passport stamp. I don't really know how we would remember, let's just say, Rocky, if he goes out there and has a ho-hum 5-round decision loss, in which most of the time Usman's taking him down and doing ground and pound, and it's not that exciting, then sometimes there can be a womp element of okay, that, you know, I mean, look, Juliana Pena had that same task, had that same freaking task against Nunes. You know, it wasn't a trilogy comeback, but it was, can you be as great as that one moment in time? Or was there really other circumstances? And certainly in the Nunes Pena fight, I believe there was some legit circumstances in terms of the shape Nunes was in, the mindset. I felt like she is now admitting she felt pressured to put that back on, make that show happen after times pulling out in the past. A lot of people are going to forget when she pulled out against Valentina ahead of that original rematch. And, Dana said she'll never main event again when she couldn't make weight that time. So, and by the way, Mike, let me ask you a question let me interrupt your question to me and ask you. I'm starting to see a lot of people make that same narrative around Erin Blanchfield's victory over Jessica Andrade. But when I say same people, I mean Valentina, when I interviewed her, had that same narrative of, hey guys, great win on paper, but Andrade was like on vacation and got the call and the money was too good and she had to come back and make things happen. So that win isn't as impressive. Do you buy into that at all?
I think you've obviously got to think about those factors, but ultimately, if you step in the cage, then you go in there with a certain level of what's the word? I can't think of the word at the moment, but a certain level of responsibility. Let's say responsibility for your own actions. So I can squint and see it, but ultimately, you step in the cage, then you've got to live with the consequences of a loss.
I guess the best part for Leon, for me, and I may have even been guilty to fess up, even after the knockout, of saying, as impressed as I am, there is an element of luck in there. I do realize that it was a strategic move. So what I'm really saying here is, I don't think Leon's win let's say he goes out there and loses in the trilogy. I don't think it feels as fluky as Matt Serra's, for example, which was a surprise sort of stoppage. And it also helps that Matt Serra didn't have a ton of big wins around that. And, sort of has one of these questionable, but very good resumes, but yet it is a first ballot UFC Hall of Famer. Okay, why? Because he's on that podcast? I don't know, right? But that happens. It will be interesting to see what Rocky does with this moment, what anyone in this spot does with this moment. Is Juliana Pena always going to be that fighter who had that one great night? I want to hope that Rocky has more. And to be honest, every time I've doubted him, he's had a little bit more, these setbacks to get to this point, never fully his fault. Right. We all wanted him to create some pro wrestling moment where he got Masvidal back. And then we had this big grudge match fight. Okay. It didn't happen. But, Leon doesn't need to be graded against because he's not this extreme trash talker.
And people often forget, let me just put in a second, Brian. People often forget the UFC Brasilia card, which was behind closed doors, was on the 14th of March. That was Kevin Lee, Charles Oliveira. The very week after was meant to be Leon Edwards fighting #1 contender Tyron Woodley, who previously had only lost to Kamaru Usman. So if that fight goes ahead, and if Leon Edwards beats Tyron Woodley at that point, that's a much different position that Tyron Woodley's in. Leon Edwards is in a much faster decision.
One decision, one change makes. Even the Bilal Muhammad fight. Let's say Leon Edwards had won that, we would have a much better idea at that point of who he was. Let's say he didn't get almost caught by Nate in round 5. You would have rebranded that as, look at Leon going to the big time, and taking care of a big name. But all that obviously built up his resolve. And you got to give him credit. It wasn't one lucky swing. It wasn't, it was a calculated strike that shook up the world. And, now I'm starting to say, well, look at what Grasso just did with Valentina, had that one moment and took advantage of it. It is harder than ever in this game to be on top for a long time. And certainly that's why I look to see what Usman can respond with. But for Leon Edwards, man, let's be honest, this is such a dark sport, right? The physical consequences. I think this era of fighter treatment is still the dark ages. This is a sport that produces a lot of cynical, responses and attitudes and all that. There's not a lot of happy endings, but the Juliana Pena upset in particular against Amanda, and the way that Leon Edwards did this against Usman, and then the interview afterwards and the John Anik call and just everything that was a bow on that package, man. It's rare. It's rare in this game. I'm a journalist. You're a journalist, but we're fans. Let's be honest. We're freaking fans. Yeah, we're addicted fanatics of this. We love this.
Yes.
It's rare when that cup tastes that pure, where it's just human nature. I say the triumph of the human spirit was how Juliana Pena broke down the walls of Nunes and won that, and just, taking one clean punch after another, but just walking through it. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes that still matters, that you can win a fight on spirit and heart alone, and that's the moments where it most mirrors our own walk with regular life. So to finally get to the answer of your question, you know what? It doesn't even matter what happens in this trilogy. Leon Edwards had his Michael Bisping moment. He's now that guy who had that moment. And it just so happens, Mike, that moment was strong enough that it almost doesn't matter what happens next.
I completely agree. I want to turn the conversation to Usman a little bit because not too much media out of Usman. You look at his Instagram profile, not too many posts, a couple of bits in the training room at Gaethje, but it feels a little, I'm getting Rocky 3 vibes, like he's gone back to basics. Now,
Mike, you have great observations. In fact, you've sparked a few Morning Kombat segments before on your great observations. I love the Rocky reference, but it's the almost comparison to in boxing where it's constant BS of can these fights be made? Where are we in the negotiations? You know, the powers that be always say, if nobody's talking about a fight negotiation publicly, that's a really good sign. That's the best sign freaking possible. That means that they're not at odds. It means that people aren't leaking info on purpose to try to gain leverage. It's a different transaction of when you go back to the drawing board and you go back, you know, and you get that Rocky Ford in Siberia and that wooden house without electricity, that mindset, or what Clubber Lang did in the opening scenes of Rocky 3, or what the Rocky 2 turnaround was of going to Apollo's gym in LA. It's the same theme of like going back to basics in bare bones. And you know, like, what's Kamaru Usman's greatest sin that ever, I mean, he got pretty far in terms of building himself into a name. He was in Wakanda Forever in like a speaking role. Like he got, you know, he's made some strides for what we always kind of silently held against him. Like, great fighter, man, but, you know, wrestling only, isn't that funny? Almost borderline cringy. Doesn't talk great trash. Yo, who cares? Like, who cares, man? That guy's awesome. And he wouldn't have become the pound for pound king if he didn't join with Trevor Whitman at the right time and purposefully add the striking and the threat of finishing to his game. So the fact that we're not hearing anything from him, I'd be very, very, very nervous on the other side. You know, just for the idea of like, he's coming. And yeah, he's, you know, he might even be 36 now.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask is if you think about Usman's run, there's quite a few rivalries in there. Like there's the Colby Covington rivalry, there's the Masvidal rivalry. There is, although it was only one fight, I felt like the Gilbert Burns fight was a big rivalry in terms of the training partners turned enemies. And I'm wondering, after him tasting defeat for such a long first time in such a long time, and obviously in the devastating fashion it was, I'm wondering where you think his mentality and his intensity will be at.
I think it's because he did get a taste of the celebrity and he was angling for the celebrity. You don't make a case to fight Canelo if you're like, I'll sacrifice my body to science for this payday notoriety that comes with it, right? You know, like you have no chance to win that fight, but you're just like, I gotta get there. I think he had enough success where he got a taste and was like, okay, that's cool. There's a price to pay for that. But you want that reminder feeling, that almost instant rock bottom feeling to hit any of your favorite fighters to relight the fire. And it puts them in a crossroads moment. And not always do guys ever properly relight that fire. And, you know, you wonder often in hindsight, is the decline of an aging fighter who still has great skills, right? Is that decline? Sometimes when it's Chuck Liddell, we go, that decline is he's a warrior who could not take any more and it's unsafe to leave him in there, but the spirit's still in there, right? Yeah. Sometimes guys retain the skills. Look at Tyron Woodley. When the wheels fell off on Tyron Woodley, and he already carried a career kind of like Usman in that weight class, deeper into their 30s than is typically allowed for their fighting style because of how athletic the 170-pound fighters are still. And he was able to delay that. But when it fell apart, it wasn't because Tyron Woodley's skill sucked. It wasn't even because his chin fell apart. It just, he no longer could activate that same competitive fire. When he held it together, I think his welterweight title reign is among the most underrated reigns of any champion in this modern run. Maybe in part because Dana never embraced Tyron and you know, and some of the wins people look back and go, damn, that was boring. Well, he also picked out the dominant skills of his opponent and either beat him exactly with that or completely neutralize that from them in brilliant ways. But again, when it fell apart, and him the rare case, it fell apart not because of chin, it's over. I don't think that I don't. If you have to ask me, is this the fight that happens to? I want to say no, and I want to say no strongly. I will hedge that no with, we can't forget that he was knocked out violently cold, right?
Yeah.
So mentally, I don't have fears that this is bad for Usman. I do believe Usman is that. He's not just the blue collar competitor. It goes even deeper. And some guys who come from different nations, different backgrounds, have a different level of motivation and determination that goes beyond, I want to win the lottery and get these, or I want to be considered the best of all time. If you never grow out of that hunger that says, I need to risk it all for my next meal, the guy, the fighters that are able to retain that, Manny Pacquiao, the fighters that are able to retain that spirit throughout their career are always going to be crazy dangerous, right? I think Usman will be fine. I think, though, he's got to figure out what the right balance is between wrestling and striking at this version, because he will start to slowly, naturally erode, slow down timing, all that reflexes. But I think the motor, the spirit, the want is still there. And I would not be surprised if he comes out and leans on his wrestling and really looks to remind us how violent his ground and pound can be, how great he is. That's why I think, with everything we just talked about, he's got to be the favorite coming back in this. I still have him higher than Edwards pound for pound. And some people think that's like the ultimate. Well, they actually fought each other, BC. They actually just fought each other. You know who's the better fighter now? Well, we don't really know that. And again, that's what you want in a rematch, when you don't really know if what you just saw is the truth, or again, was that, the one great night, the peak of what somebody could be, I mean, imagine if you or I could put it together on our biggest night and absolutely redefine what is capable of us. That's the reason why we do this, Mike Owens Media,
I think I've done it once or twice, but I do know what you mean. It's a unattainable goal, isn't it? But if we talk about pound for pound, because you mentioned it a couple of times, and obviously we had the super fight in February between Makhachev and Volkanovski. That was termed the fight for the number one pound for pound. John Jones is back last weekend. He's obviously got a say in the pound for pound list. But I'm wondering if either man in this fight has a claim to it as well, because if Usman retains his title, then he, in theory, could be placed at number one pound for pound, as he previously has been. But if Leon Usman beats pound for pound number one, you do the math and you can see how Leon Edwards could be there. So I'm wondering if you think this fight has pound for pound number one at stake as well.
Unfortunately, and why is it a recurring theme that I have to do things against Leon Edwards, right? Or still question things. I don't think that gets him number one pound for pound, even with a second straight win over the former pound for pound king, which is almost heartbreaking. But part of that is because the rise of Islam and Volkanovski, even with Volkanovski losing that close fight, I think they've just exceeded what we even thought, in terms of where they could reach themselves in reputation. And, their fight was a classic in many ways of seeing two hungry, absolutely elites with a case of the best in sport at the time to go against each other and to leave us wanting more. And, not in an immediate rematch, but in the idea of damn, not only could these two see each other again, man, I could see Volkanovski at lightweight again. And if that was the only discussion, I still think the potential of Leon doing it twice, because he doesn't have as many, the resume. I think this is going to sound contradictory, because I'm not big on pound for pound. I'm big on people's misuse of the criteria, because it's so natural for most people to say, oh, pound for pound doesn't matter. It's some guy in his basement, playing fantasy matchups in his head.
Yeah.
Well, it is. But the purpose of that is because the sport is, well, in boxing's case, it's so broken and detached, but in both cases, both combat sports, the athletes fight so little per year because of the obvious, grind of the sport, that it's hard, you have to fill time, first of all, in debate, barbershop style debates on podcasts. But this is the only true currency to truly decide when I see the pound for pound rankings, I'm not looking to see in the order of who accomplished the most, right? That gets you membership in the discussion. If you have a sustained, proven track record, it allows you in the conversation up high. But I feel that a pound for pound ranking should be more about who are you in this moment? Have you proven that either through accomplishments or through the eye test of what you've done against who's been available to you? Has that been enough to prove that you might be the best fighter in the sport, considering that most of the time they won't get to fight each other on even terms to decide that? That's a long way of me saying normally I'm more of an in the moment. What did you just do? That showed me that. But I guess there's levels to how Leon could do this. I mean, if he, because if he dominates Usman, are we going to start saying, well, hey, Usman had a great run, but it's clearly over now? I just think if Leon, it's going to be harder for him to catapult into that. And here's my long-winded way of saying, not just because of Islam and Alex, but because John Jones' return is a big dent in the middle of that conversation right now. A fun, and it's more fun that we have. If you add the idea that Usman coming back and triumphantly winning when he was the pound for pound king before the first loss, should allow him, if he dominates Edwards, or inclusion right back in. Yeah, if he dominates Edwards and triumphantly on enemy territory is like, y'all must have forgot. It's really going to be hard, and I'm really going to be interested to see where the voting goes, because I feel like everyone should be in agreement that what John Jones did against Gane was crazy impressive, and John Jones cemented all time who we always thought he really was, the best, not without argument, but with a bullet. Okay, but who's the best right now? That was 2 minutes against Gane that did not tell us exactly who John Jones is right now, did not tell us exactly what the future looks like for him at heavyweight, or really did just, for the sake of his own dominance mixed with just a shitty night for Cyril Gane, just a disappointing as shit performance. It did not give us enough understanding of exactly where John is. So he has to be 3 and no higher, in my opinion. But yeah, Usman might be able to outleap them all. I mean, can you make a case here why Leon should also? I mean, is it that I'm using my criteria that what you've done totality isn't as important of what you've done right now? I'm almost throwing that away to tell you, hey, Leon, good luck. Hope you retain your title, but you can't be king this time. You need more. He might need more, Mike. He might need a little bit more.
He might, of course. Very quickly, I know we're running out of time. I want to talk about the co-main very quickly. Justin Gaethje taking on Rafael Fiziev. Massive fight at lightweight. I'm going to give you a comparison here, and the comparison that I see in boxing, I know you're a boxing guy originally, is Caleb Plant, David Benavidez. And in my head, I see this almost as a boxer versus puncher. Whereas if it's a very technical chess match on the feet, Fiziev, in theory, should light him up, Fiziev being Caleb Plant. And if it's an all-out war, Justin Gaethje has the advantage in the way David Benavidez has the advantage. I wonder if you see that fight perhaps in as black and white terms as boxer versus puncher.
I did not think of it that way. So, but I like that framing, and it certainly has along with that style contrast and the way you describe that, it has this like crossroads element of like, long-time contender, multi-time title challenger who could be going that way, mixing with the guy who might be kicking your door in soon. But I like the way you put that in terms of the true nature of what might win it for both guys, because Fiziev is still as action oriented as shit when he needs to be, but it definitely is more precise than what we've seen of late from Gaethje. And I'm very fair to tell you that I love Justin Gaethje. He's probably my favorite fighter to watch. And sometimes that leads me to overrate him. And I did, there was a disappointing element in my eyes of how long he was not able to compete with Oliveira, or in some of the recent losses at the highest level where you're like, man, did he hit his ceiling? And I just didn't see that. He still might have it right now. But if you're asking me the true nature of when I see this fight on paper, what do I think of besides what time is it on? Because this is going to be a badass fight. It's even further than the badass element. This era of lightweight previously was like historically deep when we had Conor, Tony, Khabib, Dustin, Gaethje, all those on top at the same time competing for the same title, and all the hatred between a lot of them. But what it's devolved to, while bantamweight has taken over, in my opinion, as the best division in the sport, is these aging stars still make great fights with one another. And I think this 5-6 year run of Poirier, Alvarez, Gaethje, Tony, and really name them, whoever else you want to put in there, that have all fought each other and have all just made Chandler when he arrived, that have all just made like Oliveira for a run, just bad ass, freaking replayably instant, awesome. I don't know what to do with myself right now. Oh, UFC Fight Pass is on this. Yeah, let's watch that. Those moments. Is Fiziev ready to join that club potentially? That downgrades what this fight really means to him, which is the biggest name yet he can slice and get to another level to prove what his upper bound limits, as Luke Thomas would say, truly are. But dude, the badass fan of me is like, I think I might need to start get a getting out a personal top 10 ranking of my favorite fights involving all those names I just mentioned over the past 5 years. Like, doesn't it feel golden era-ish? Like every time it's like,
Four kings.
challenge fighting Poirier?
Four
What?
kings of
Okay.
MMA. Four kings of MMA.
You know, it reminds me of when Chuck, Tito, Randy, and Ken Shamrock in particular were all round robining each other, and they were all at that point of the less evolved modern day UFC. They were skilled, but you had to be a brawler to win fights in 2, 3, 4, 5. A lot of times it came down to who was the better brawler at the end of the day. And this has that old school feel at lightweight. I mean, what has been the biggest treat of that journey? RDA was a part of that for a bit.
Yeah.
An aging Anthony Pettis was part of that for a bit. Is there a fight? Is there one? Michael Johnson Gaethje, is there one that stands out to you as like, damn, that was the night?
I would say Poirier Gaethje. Poirier Gaethje to me, I think it's the one that goes the longest if memory serves. I think if you want to squint and see Max Dustin in that category, you can maybe go with that one. I know you were obviously there, but if we need to add that. Well, if we're going with that, then you would naturally go with that as the 5-round fight. But I would say Poirier Gaethje for me, the climax, the fact that it kind of is over in a second with that big straight left, and then Gaethje falling the way he did.
That's right.
I think that's
right because, okay, we want to pick Johnson Gaethje because it was the most like Gotti Ward Rocky movie, like crazy. And you know who doesn't get credit? Todd Grisham in that brief stint he had in the UFC. He called that fight. Dude, Todd Grisham goes from 0 to 60 as good as anyone in the game across both sports, in my opinion. You know, just like, the moment's here, I'm going to drop this vocal bomb on you. But I'm also tempted at times to say, okay, well, was one for the title or was one more important? Does that make it better? You nailed it, dude. I actually think you're right. I think that it's Poirier versus Gaethje. And I think Eddie versus Poirier was a great warm-up to that. And Eddie versus Gaethje was also a great warm-up to that. And then when you fast forward a few more years, that Chandler Poirier fight most recently, it was actually better than I thought it was and better than it could be. You know, I mean, so was Chandler Oliveras. I mean, so was Dan Hooker, probably had a couple. Hooker Poirier was a night. That was a night, man. So every time I offer the idea of, hey, what's Poirier or Gaethje doing? They should just rematch. And people are like, dude, enough with all we get is rematches. And all you want to do is support these aging guys who, you know, gave you those feels that time. Yeah, you're right. I'm guilty. I'm guilty. All right. I want to see it again. I'm guilty. You know, I mean, I guess that's why Creed 3 is a thing, right? People want to see it again and again and again.
Exactly that. Brian, we'll have to leave it there. But I think if you've got me more excited for that co-main event, and especially for the main event, which we broke down in large detail. Thank you as always for your time. It really is always a pleasure to catch up. On a personal note, I do appreciate the shout outs here and there on your show. It really does help me out, and I do appreciate that from a personal
excellent, dude.
And I wish you the best.
MK approved there, Mike Owens Media. Appreciate your hard work and great questions as always. So it's great talking to you, buddy.
Make sure to subscribe to the LowKick MMA YouTube channel for all the latest news, event previews, and interviews with some of the biggest stars in MMA.